excited to have Jeff Edwards. He's an extension specialist with UW Extension. He's located in the southeast part of the state. And today he's going to be covering pest management inside and out. So hopefully inside structures and outside, but we'll see where we go.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremiah.
Yep.
So, it's not the inside and out of pest management, it's pest management inside and out. So, yes, mostly in. I'll try not to blind myself. So for those of you who were in my presentations this morning, you've already seen this, but I am an entomologist. I'm a cyclist. My wife and I ride this funky contraption over here that's on the right-hand side. It's a recumbent tandem trike. It's 9.5, yeah, maybe, we'll get to those in a minute. It's about 9.5 feet long. So if you see this thing out on the Wyoming roads, don't veer towards it, give me enough space, okay? I also consider myself a catalyst. I help people get things done, I think. I try to. I spent 3 years investigating the biological control of aphids in grad school, principally using predators like lady beetles, but there are also parasites too. Spent 15 years in the ag chemical industry, trying to look for new insecticides really, a lot of other stuff too. When that particular career ended, my wife and I spent 8 years growing specialty crops. So we had a U-pick raspberry, strawberry business along with other small things that other producers do in the Torrington, Wyoming area. We had some significant challenges though. And I've also been working for Extension since 2008 in a variety of capacities. I started as an extension educator in Goshen County. I am now responsible for the pesticide safety education programs. So for those individuals who need a pesticide applicator's license, I'm responsible for that curriculum and trying to get people tested for that. And then I do a variety of things for Extension. A lot of small acre interaction, a lot of horticulture discussions with folks, so wide and varying background. So I am an entomologist. This is the pest management portion of the day. This gives me an opportunity to nerd out a little bit. So if you want to be out of here at 3 o'clock, good luck. If you need to leave, go ahead. This is actually a part of a Master Gardener program that takes me about 3 hours to present. So I've been trying to whittle it down to get it into an hour. So we're going to talk about integrated pest management here quickly. Okay, it's a planned, detailed approach to managing pests. Uses multiple pest control methods to reduce the potential for resistance. Think of integrated pest management as a toolbox that's available to you. Okay, so you have all these things in your toolbox. You have to figure out what the problem is and use the right tool and then fix it and then go on, right? Okay. So a sustainable approach to managing pests by combining biological, cultural, physical, and chemical tools in a way that minimizes economic, health, and environmental risks. Okay, number one step in IPM, identifying the pest. So if you don't know the weed, if you don't know what it is, a buddy of mine and I, we do a radio program about pest problems and things like that. It's Fridays in Goshen County. We had a gal call up and she said, hey, I've got crabweed in my lawn every year and I've been applying a pre-emergent product, but the crabweed comes back. Crabgrass, excuse me. I said, well, are you certain it's crabgrass? Well, I don't know. You know, so how can you treat something if you don't know what it is, right? You really got to identify what the problem is. And a lot of this presentation is insect-centric, but the stuff we talk about applies to weeds and disease and all those types of things too, okay? So evaluate the damage that's there. Yeah, so this is turf. This is a fungal pathogen in turf. We live in Wyoming. We don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. But yes, is this a problem? Certainly. Something needs to be done about it, okay? Is that crabgrass growing next to that sidewalk truly a problem? Not necessarily. It's green, it's grass. I don't necessarily need to do anything about it, right? So you need to evaluate whether it's a problem, okay? Determine the need for control. Dandelions, do you got to control them? The parks in Canada have outlawed all 2,4-D use to prevent controlling dandelions. They're the first flower out. They're really good for pollinators. Do you need to control them? It depends. That's one of the extension answers, right? It depends, okay? And then something like squash bugs. If they're there and they're sucking on plants that you're going to eat eventually, yeah, you might want to control them. You might have wanted to control them before the plant started looking like that, okay? So consider all your steps, or all your options. This is your toolbox, okay? So is vacuuming an option? Sure. For certain things, right? You can burn weeds, burn things. The ditch company burns weeds every year in my neighborhood, right? So they're cleaning out the ditches, they're burning those things so that water flows. Biological control, mechanical control, hand weeding. How many people dig dandelions? Yeah, yeah. And then chemical control options, okay? Select the best combination. So maybe early on in the year, digging is okay, but they start to get away from you. You can't keep up with them. So you might want to try a vinegar product. If that's not enough, you might want to go for a traditional herbicide. Okay, you just got to figure out what works best for you. And then after you choose to do these things, monitor it, because what you did might not have worked and you might need to try something else. Or maybe it did work and you're like, hoorah, I don't have to do it anymore. I can move on to something else. Okay? So IPM options, the things in your toolbox. It's host plant resistance, there's biological control, cultural control, mechanical, sanitation, and chemical. Okay? Whew. All right, IPM options. Host plant resistance. Oops, sorry. You can find disease or insect resistant cultivars that are commercially available. So when you are looking at your seed catalogs, probably should have done this a month ago instead of this month, but there will be descriptors in there that says, hey, this thing is powdery mildew resistant, and I get powdery mildew every year, so maybe I want to look at that particular variety and grow it so that I don't have problems this year, okay? Host plant resistance exists through natural selection, active selection, plant breeding, or intentional gene transfer. All of these methods are GMOs. So when people talk about GMOs being bad, if it's natural selection and it's a GMO product because there's gene transfer at some level, okay? All right, biological. Okay, nerd out time. Entomophagous insects, things that eat other bugs, okay? Predators, parasites. Phytophagous insects, so if you have a weed that you are trying to use biological control on, you can get other insects that might eat that plant. So weed and pest districts, they are importing insects to consume different plants to try to help keep them in check. Okay, so it's a viable option. Pathogens and growth regulators are in the biological category. So not only do you need to know what the problem is, but you also need to be able to recognize all the good guys, right? So lady beetle on the far right, adult. What's wrong with that lady beetle? It's not red. Color is not a good indicator of what a lady beetle should look like, okay? It looks like a lady beetle. It is a lady beetle, but it's white. Do we have these in Wyoming? No. But there are a whole lot of different varieties of lady beetles in the state, okay? Do you recognize the eggs of lady beetles? Okay. Usually on the underneath side of the plant, usually in the presence of aphids, those types of things. Usually laid in a cluster, not singly. The larvae of lady beetles. These things are sometimes described as alligators because they walk like alligators. They are kind of cool to watch, okay? Lady beetles have complete metamorphosis, so they have a pupal stage, they have a resting stage, a non-feeding stage, and it just sits there. Looks like that, okay? And it'll be stuck to the plant. So, funny story. I'm sorry, I keep looking at the clock because I know I got lots of stories. I can tell lots of things about bugs. I'm in school to be an entomologist. My mom calls me. She goes, hey, I got something on my plants. They're eating my plants. I know they are. I said, well, describe it. She goes, well, it's yellow and black, and it walks like an alligator. I go, well, that's the good guy. Don't be worrying about them. And she says, yeah, but there's this other thing on there that's stuck to the plant, and I know it's sucking the juice out. The pupa. I go, don't spray nothing. It's the good guys. So it's really important to know all the good guys, too. So some things that you might not traditionally see. Who's familiar with lacewings? Those things. You ever smashed one? They smell like you've smoked 10 packs of cigarettes. They're disgusting. I don't know how else to describe it, okay? As an adult, they are not predatory. They are just around to drink and reproduce, okay? Their larvae are so predaceous. So insects and entomology makes really good science fiction, okay? So the larvae are so predaceous that is the egg, okay? It's laid on a stalk at the very tip of the stalk. If they were laid in a cluster like lady beetles, the first one out would eat all the rest of them, okay? They've got these hypodermic syringe mouth parts. If they can catch it and they can suck the juice out of another insect, it's dead, okay? So they're really efficient, and they will bite you. I'm telling you, they will bite you. They're not that big, fortunately, so it's not that, you don't have to worry about it. That's the pupal case, that round thing. Sometimes you'll see these tucked into plant matter, okay? Here's my nerding out thing. How many of you, and this was just on HBO like a month ago, the original Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan. Do you remember that movie? Do you remember when Khan dropped that thing into Chekhov's ear and it controlled him? Kind of looks the same, right? Science fiction, okay? All right, so other predators that are out there. Syrphid flies. Who knew that those cute little things that are buzzing around flowers that look kind of like bees that hover in front of them are predators? The adults aren't, but the larvae are. That slimy looking thing right there is a really efficient predator, okay? And pupal case, that's the egg. So just be familiar that those types of things are out there. So if you are looking at colonies of aphids and you see weird things happening that don't necessarily look like aphids, it could be a beneficial insect that's showing up to do its job. Parasites. Really weird parasites. Everybody familiar with aphids? You know, guys know what aphids look like? Okay. These little guys here, right? So, more science fiction. How about the movie Alien? Recall the movie Alien, where the thing busts out of the guy's chest, you know, the scariest part of the whole movie, everything kind of built up to that. That's what these guys do. They're little tiny wasps. They fly around, they find aphids. They sting them, they lay aphids in them. They lay eggs in them. The eggs hatch inside that aphid. That larva is inside of that aphid, feeding on the inside of that aphid while it's still alive. And then it comes to a point where there's nothing left in the aphid. The larva spins a cocoon on the inside of that aphid, making these golden versions of aphids, or they could be black too. It just depends on the parasite. And those things are called mummies. They're aphid mummies at that point. Okay? The aphids have died. And then they pupate, the adults emerge, they cut this little round hatch, kick the door open, and then fly out. Sorta. Okay? kind of like that. Pathogens. So there are some pathogens that are available. There's a very limited number of them. Conditions have to be just right for them to work for us. We live in a low humidity environment, so yeah, you might get some efficacy out of these. There's a product called Dipel. Yeah, but we won't go into that right now, okay? And again, great science fiction. Does this look familiar for any of you who follow The Last of Us or watch The Last of Us? Okay, this fungus that infests humans. Okay, this is the reality of it. There are fungi that infest insects. That's where they got this idea. Okay, makes great science fiction. All right, so the last option is growth regulators, insect growth regulators. So insects wear their skeleton on the outside of their body, right? In order for them to grow, they have to get out of that exoskeleton, and then the new one develops on the inside. They split out of it, they get out of it, the new one hardens up. It's all hormone driven. If you can mess up that system with a synthetic product, they won't molt, they won't lay eggs, and if they do lay eggs, the individuals don't grow. Tools, things for you to know. Moving on to some cultural items, okay? Tillage, if you have, this is a grasshopper area. Sheridan is a grasshopper area. Anybody ever dealt with grasshoppers before? So tillage at a correct time can destroy egg masses in the soil, okay? So it can be a control option or a management option. Mulching, if you're putting mulch out, you're saving soil moisture, but you're also preventing weeds, okay? So there's these different things that you can do to help. Crop rotation helps in disease management. If you have well-fertilized and well-watered plants that are really healthy, you are also preventing insect pests and pathogens and those types of things, okay? Mechanical type things, this includes traps, putting collars around your plants so that slugs can't get to them or cutworms can't get to them. Vacuuming, yes, it is a real thing. People do this. Ghostbusters. Only they're not projecting anything. He's actually sucking the stuff up, okay? Hand removal. That is my best demonstration of hand removal, okay? If you've got a big pest, and you're not afraid of it, I'd be wearing a glove, actually, or something else. You know, and then things like mowing, and you have all of these different tactics available that kind of fall into your toolbox to help you manage pests, okay? And then the last one is sanitation. So planting certified weed-free seed, right? So you buy a packet of seed, it'll tell you how much, particularly grass seed. Grass seed is notorious for this. So it'll say, okay, it's 5% weed seed. It won't tell you what they are, but it'll say, it should say on there a percentage of how many weeds are actually in that packet, okay? But if you can find certified weed-free seed. Jeremiah works up in the Powell area. They do a lot of weed seed certification, weed-free. It's been a long day. You know what I'm saying. Yeah, thank you. That's a whole lot easier, okay? And then, you know, sanitation, removal of harborages. So rodents and flies and some of these things that are pesty, they like to hide in stuff like this. So if you've got a cleaned up area, it's probably better and you're eliminating some problems. Okay, and then chemical, right? So walk into any store, you can buy a chemical, you can find things on the internet, you can do all types of stuff. Pesticides are just as important as any other management tactic. And we're talking about management. We're talking about kill, control, alter normal development, repel, or attract, okay? So natural products, which can also be called biopesticides, or organic products, are natural or man-made versions of things found in nature which control pests. Okay? So there are things that are derived from, let's say, chrysanthemums. And I've forgotten the name of the product. It's escaped me since I put this presentation together. But you can buy it in places and mix it with water and spray it on, and it's an organic product. Okay? But I want to point out that recipe that you got off the internet is a pesticide, okay? Because you're trying to manage something else, okay? So pesticide, the term pesticide encompasses a whole lot of different things. When choosing a pesticide, make sure that you read the label, okay? Jeremiah's giggling back there because the gal that was up here doing the seed germination program, what's the one thing she said? She had the packet of seeds and she's like, read the packet, it'll tell you what to do. If you use a pesticide, it'll tell you exactly how to use it, what personal protective equipment to wear, right? Okay, so make sure you read the label. This includes those natural things or those biocontrol things because nicotine, arsenic, and strychnine are considered natural products, okay? Just saying. So let's talk about the pests. Any questions before I move on? Am I shotgunning you? You getting way too much information? Okay, let's talk about pests. Let's talk about rodents first. If you have an enclosed space that you are growing food in, you are also going to have rodents, okay? It doesn't matter if you see them or not. They're there, okay? So, you know, you've got a variety of mice. You've got voles. How do you tell a vole from a mouse? They're smaller. Their tails are smaller and their ears are different. Their ears are bigger, I think, or smaller. I don't know, one of those two. But they're different. How many of you guys have to put up with kangaroo rats? Yes. In the back in Goshen County. What do kangaroo rats do on a row of crop, Amy?
They pretty much devastate it.
So they walk right, mice do this too, but the kangaroo rats will go right down the row and pick up corn as it's germinating and eat them and devastate a whole field, okay? Rats, pack rats. Who's dealing with pack rats? Pack rats are a good time, aren't they? Yeah, so how do you manage them? Again, you've got to know what the culprit is in order to choose the correct management tactic, because what works for a bushy-tailed wood rat won't necessarily work for a mouse, okay? Baiting is a good option, okay? But use a bait station because you don't want to be sprinkling that stuff out on your growing area, okay? Snap traps, flip traps. Do you know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a flip trap? A lid on top of a 5-gallon bucket that's baited and they can walk up to it and flip into it. They work really well. Sticky traps. I'm not a big fan of sticky traps because anybody ever seen a half-naked mouse? It's not very appealing. Yeah, it's... I don't know. When they said that sticky traps are more, what's the word I'm looking for? More humane. I don't think so. I really don't think so. Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. So anyhow, you will have these things. You need to know how to control them or manage them. Okay? More pests, diseases. Fortunately, we live in Wyoming. It's very dry here. We don't have a lot of diseases, but certain times of the year we'll get powdery mildew, okay? Here's the thing that you need to know. There are no curative products available. Once you have powdery mildew, you're done. You can't fix it, okay? There are only preventative disease management products. So you have to, if you apply them, you have to put them on before the conditions are perfect for diseases, okay? So, and my last point here, don't plant vining plants in enclosed spaces, because in enclosed space you are increasing humidity, you are increasing every opportunity for diseases to start, okay? So don't grow vining things in your high tunnel other than cucumbers. And if you grow cucumbers, don't let them vine out on the ground, but trellis them up so that you can get some airflow around them, okay? Don't sprinkle water. Water sitting on the leaf surface allows these pathogens to germinate. Weeds. Who has weed problems? One or two, right? Yeah, right? Okay. Number one thing you can do everything in your power to prevent them from developing seed heads. Okay, if you can do that, you're way ahead of the game. Okay, you know, mechanical, physical means, and chemical. I don't ever apply herbicides in my garden. I'm always out there hoeing or hand pulling. Okay, how many of you are familiar with stirrup hoes? Okay, they're a little U-shaped thing, flat on the bottom. You push them, you pull them. They get up underneath the weed and they cut it off. It's an excellent tool. My wife and I, in our days of owning the U-Pick raspberry strawberry farm, the two of us could hand weed our acre of strawberries in about a week. And then it was time to start over again. Okay, so, and if it rained, you needed to really start over again, okay? So, again, use everything in your power to try to prevent weeds from going to seed. All right, time to nerd out again, sorry. Understanding insect damage. So the damage caused by insects can help us identify them, right? Insects have different types of mouth parts. You guys ever looked at insects really closely? This presentation kind of creep you out a little bit? Yeah. Okay. So we have chewing mouth parts, right? Up and down. Insects, there are certain classes of insects that have chewing mouth parts. Their mouth parts go like this. Because what are they feeding on mostly? Leaves. The margins of leaves, the side of a leaf, right? So instead of holding it like this, they're actually able to stand there and feed on it. Piercing, sucking mouth parts. Mosquitoes. They're not plant pests, but to help you understand what piercing, sucking mouth parts are like, right? Everybody has experienced a mosquito bite, I think. So there are pests like aphids that have piercing, sucking mouth parts. They probe into the phloem, which is a vein of a plant that's transporting sugar, okay, and they're mainlining sugar out of that plant, okay? The damage is usually an indicator of what type of mouth parts pests possess. I've kind of covered that, right? So if you have piercing, sucking mouth parts, you're not going to be missing plant matter. You're going to have other symptoms that you'll be able to see and identify, okay? And it's also important to be able to recognize all the life forms. Just like we did with the beneficials, it's important to recognize all the different life forms of insects so you know which ones are actually causing your problems. So we're going to start with the crop chewers. These are the things that have chewing mouth parts. There are multiple insect orders involved, so kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, all that stuff. Beetles, okay, have chewing mouth parts. Grasshoppers have chewing mouth parts. They're in different orders, okay? They physically remove and consume plant tissue, right? They're feeding on it, they're removing it. Economic thresholds, you know, what are they? It's the point really where you want to start doing something about them, but most plants can tolerate 20% of their tissue loss before you even think that you should be doing something about it. Again, one of those steps in IPM, is it really a problem? Do I only have 2 or 3 of them affecting 2 or 3 plants? Or is my whole entire crop at jeopardy? Okay. Many of these are cryptic feeders. And what I mean by that is they stay hidden, they feed only at night. There's a whole lot of different strategies to avoid you detecting them. All right, so the Lepidoptera larvae. These are commonly called worms, right? These are not earthworms. These are lep larvae. So the cutworms, right? The adults are migratory. They're these nondescript, what people call miller moths. I do not know why they are miller moths. They should just be moths. But they have this weird behavior when you touch them. They curl up in a really tight ball, okay? They're usually nothing outstanding about them. They're kind of dull color. They can be green, they can be brown. Really kind of boring, okay? But when they're hungry in the springtime, the adults will come in, they'll lay their eggs, and the larvae will start feeding and clipping off plants, okay? So you may or may not notice it right away, because what they'll do is they'll clip the plant and then they'll sit back underneath the soil and they'll chew on that plant that they've clipped off for a day or two until it gets to a point where it's wilted enough that they're not interested in it enough, and they'll move on to another one, okay? So it's trying to identify them. These are cryptic feeders. You will not see them unless you dig around in the soil around these plants that have been clipped off, generally. You will see the adults. How many of you guys have experienced these? So they're migratory, right? They fly from the south, pass through, lay eggs, go to the mountains, and the grizzly bears like to eat them. So they do serve a purpose. Yes, sir?
We have found cutworms are native now in the Bighorn Basin.
Not surprising. Yeah, so they are not all migratory. But in Goshen County, a lot of them fly up from Colorado. More of these worms, army worms. So army cutworms, very similar. We've already had outbreaks of army cutworms in Goshen County. Okay, they're army cutworms because they march en masse across your landscape, consuming, eating, walking across, harassing the dog, harassing the cat, or the cat's harassing them, I don't know. But again, what's the difference between that adult and the previous one? There is some. You guys don't need to know it, but you know, they cause a problem. And these are more plant feeders. So they'll get up into the plant, put the holes in the plant itself, and their larvae are a little bit different, okay? Cabbage loopers. So this is the typical inchworm. So the larvae, when you're looking at them, when they walk, they'll walk, you know that inchworm song? I can't remember the inchworm song, but there was a song. There is a song. Anyhow, but it's a typical inchworm walk. A lot of these others, they just will walk along, but this thing, I don't know. You'll have to see it, okay? These things fly along with the miller moth population, okay? So all of the covering on these, it's called scales. These guys look like they've had a bad hair day for life. The scales on the back of them, it stands straight up, okay? And they've got this squid or octopus looking marking on their wings. Anybody ever seen them before? But you've seen these guys show up in your cabbage, right? So the adults are mostly nocturnal or dusk, twilight. Probably won't see them very often, but you will see these guys. So I've been forgetting to mention, you know, these are the management strategies for these things. If you find so scouting, when you're looking for problems, it's really important for you to go through on a regular basis and look for things. So they like to lay their eggs on the underneath side of cabbage leaves. So pick that cabbage leaf up, look at it. The eggs are probably going to be near the center rib, the midrib, or the veins of the cabbage leaf. Squish them. Take your thumb and smash them, okay? You've eliminated your problem. Most of them. But there are going to be some that get away that you haven't seen, right? So there's parasitic insects that work really well on these. There's pesticides. This product containing Bt. So Bt is Bacillus thuringiensis. The commercially available product is called Dipel. It's a bacterium, okay? They eat it. It messes up how they feed. They stop feeding, they die. Okay, it is an organic product. And then there's other organic or other products that you can spray that are contact, meaning if the product gets on them, it kills them, or if they eat it, they will die. Okay, yeah, cabbage loopers, cabbage butterflies. So a lot of people. Let me back up. Cabbage butterfly. You guys are familiar with this thing? Flits around a lot. A lot of people confuse this butterfly with that caterpillar. Yeah. Don't do that. They're two different things. Okay, so, but feeding damage is similar. The larva can be yellow striped and with kind of blue stripes. They're a little bit fuzzy, okay? But these guys fly around a lot. They get blamed for the cabbage loopers. Two different things, okay? Tomato hornworms. How many of you have ever seen tomato hornworms in your tomatoes? These guys, right? They're about the size of your thumb or bigger. They're big. Hand removal. Grab the horn. Pull them off your plant. They're going to swing around and strike at you. Don't be afraid. They can't get their mouth parts on. Oops, sorry, I'm spitting. They can't get their mouth wide enough to bite you. It's more of a thump. They're just trying to, it's a threatening thing. So, grab the horn, yank them off the plant, okay? Or throw them outside and let the birds eat them. Vengeance is mine. That's the adult, okay? Very pretty. Hummingbird moth. Loves petunias at dusk. So they're flying around, really like petunias. Hey, look, I've got hummingbirds. No, you've got hummingbird moths. Okay? So they can be a really big problem in tomatoes. They love tomatoes. They love other things too, but they're big. They eat a lot. They eat all the time. So, you know, there are some parasitic insects out there. This is like entomology geek time. So there are parasites which occupy only one other body. Okay, so in the aphid system, those parasites, it's one parasite per aphid. In these guys, the parasite that particularly likes these lays multiple eggs. So instead of just having one larva burrowing around in there, you have hundreds of them. And sometimes you'll come across one of these things that have projections sticking out of its back. You've seen them, haven't you? Okay? Those are parasite pupa sticking out of the back of it that have emerged from this caterpillar. Now, these caterpillars are so big, they might live, but they certainly aren't hungry anymore. Yeah, it's kind of gross, kind of creepy, kind of weird. It's entomology. Still things with chewing mouth parts. Flea beetles. How many of you have dealt with flea beetles before? Okay, why do you call them flea beetles? They jump. They jump a long ways. For the size that they are, which is very minute, they travel a really long distance. They've got great big muscly hind legs and they'll, bing, they're gone. You disturb them, they're out of there. Okay? You'll never see the larva or the pupa because they're in the soil. So the adults feed on the plant. The larvae, when they're in the soil, when the larvae are ready to pupate, they pupate in the soil and then the adults come out. Okay? So the only good thing, there aren't any parasites or predators that eat these things. So the only good way to manage them is through pesticides, usually a contact poison or an ingestion poison. How many of you have seen Mexican bean beetles? Yes. We have them, but they haven't been as much of a problem as they were in, let's say, the late 80s. I do not know why, but they're around, okay? What do they look like to you? They're related. These are plant-feeding coccinellids, okay, which is the same family or the same genus that lady beetles are in, okay? This little guy does not look like an alligator. That's the larva. They're little yellow spiny things, okay? The darker copper penny colored ones, those are the ones that have overwintered. So they're the ones that are going to show up first, okay? So there are parasitic insects out there. They're difficult to find. Then there are pesticides available to use, either contact or ingestion products. Colorado potato beetles. Who grows potatoes? Have you had Colorado potato beetles?
You know, it's funny because some years you'll have them and next years you don't.
Yep.
Last year I had a few, but I get them early. I literally go out there with a can and or gloves and I squish them.
Yes. Disgusting, but effective.
It works. The most fun I had though was when my son was 2.5, 3 years old and he was learning to use a hammer. I'd pick them and put them on a slab and he found them. He thought he begged me to go out and find more.
Is he an entomologist? Again, disgusting, but, you know, entertaining. So, you know, I do not like these things. They look slimy. They're really not. It's just the way that they look, but they will puke on you if you pick them up. They're really gross. The funny thing is, these are one of the most insecticide-resistant pests that are out there. They have multiple generations. They get treated a lot in commercial potato production, and within a year or two, whatever new thing they come out with, they're resistant to it. So it's really important that if you are using pesticides to rotate your pesticides that you're using, you're not using the same thing over and over again, okay?
How do they winter over? I mean, I actually swear that if you get potato seeds or the plant, they actually come in on the potatoes.
They shouldn't. The adults overwinter.
They do.
Yeah. Yep. They're the first out in the spring. This is kind of interesting. Do you all know what buffalo burr is? A weed? So those of us in Goshen County, it's a very prominent weed there. But what I've found, I don't intentionally plant buffalo burr because I can't stand it. But there's a lot of volunteer buffalo burr where I'm at. And the buffalo burr is more often infested than my potatoes. Grasshoppers. Yeah, look, talk about puking on you. One of these things, pick them up, they'll do the same thing. This is another Goshen County specialty. This is a lubber grasshopper. That is the adult form. There are no wings on it, and be thankful because they grow to be the size of small mice. You do not want them flying around. And if there is an outbreak of them, it's greasy on the road. Right, Amy? Down in your neck of the woods especially. No. No, we're not even going to go there. Totally different. So they remove a lot of plant material. Grasshoppers are bad. There's a whole lot of different things you can do. Hand removal. If they're the size of mice, okay. That can only go so far. Tillage, again, as I mentioned. Trap crops. A lot of these insect pests really prefer the weedy boundaries around your garden. If you mow those spots, they're going to go to the garden. So, I mean, leave natural places for them to go to and try to keep them out of your garden, okay? Planting timing. Usually in enclosed spaces, you're not going to have problems with grasshoppers. I did. They get in, right? If you don't control them for a couple of years, then you have a bad explosion. So there are things that you have to do in order to get them under control. So they have incomplete metamorphosis. The littlest one looks just like the biggest one, only without wings. And they go through these different instars. If you get them at this stage, you can control the entire population. So at the second instar stage, they're about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit longer. Really hard to see, really difficult to know that they're there. But if you can time an insecticide application at that point in time, you'll wipe them out, okay? If you wait till they get here and they have wings and you're like, oh, I gotta spray the grasshoppers, at that point, it's a revenge killing because they've already laid eggs and you're just making yourself feel good, okay? That's it. So there's some other things out there. There's this milky spore stuff. It's Nosema locusta. You have to put it out year after year after year in anticipation that you will have an outbreak. Again, it's not the best thing for Wyoming, okay? But then there are other things like insecticide brand baits, so you're not really spraying anything, but you're putting bait out there for them to feed on, and contact and ingestion products. Okay, moving on, sapsuckers. Sorry, I'm really bombarding you all. Nymphs and adults. So most of these sap-sucking insects have incomplete metamorphosis. The little one looks just like the big one as they grow, okay? And they all feed on the same place, the same area. These are things like aphids, those types of things, okay? So the plant damage indicators, wilted plants. Again, if I'm out in my garden, on my growing space, I'm looking at my plants going, that plant looks a little funny, and I start looking at it because it's wilted, it may have aphids. Might have other things, but it could have aphids. Honeydew. So, like I mentioned, these insects are mainlining sugar out of a plant. If they can't process it fast enough, they develop or release a product that's called honeydew, which is sugary, okay? And so then they flick it away from their body and it gets on plants and it's this shiny, why does my plant look really shiny? I don't know, it might have aphids, okay? If honeydew is left to linger in places, this stuff called sooty mold will grow in the honeydew. So if you park cars under trees that are notoriously have aphids, they'll get sticky, and then if you leave them there too long, they turn black. Take it to a car wash, it'll wash right off. Okay, ants. Ants love honeydew. Ants actually take aphids and move them from one plant to another. Ants are not your friends. Puckered leaves, so aphid feeding, you have all these mouth parts going in and out of a leaf. A plant will respond by changing the way that it grows. It'll change. Color loss. You got a whole bunch of aphids sucking the life force out of you, you're going to change color. Okay? And then eventually death. These guys, since they have hypodermic needles for mouth parts, they are really good vectors of plant diseases. So you have this compounding effect of things that can occur, okay? All right, aphids, wide variety of host and habitats. They'll feed on anything from roots, there are root aphids, to stems, twigs, leaves, okay? Just different aphids, different habitats, feed in different spots. They're not always green. We have a lot of the green varieties in Wyoming, but they're not always green. Color is not a good indicator of what a bug is, okay? They live in colonies. They have alarm pheromones. So if you happen to smash an aphid on the edge of a colony, all the rest of them will go, crap, something's bad, get off the plant. They'll just dive off the plant, okay? They have a very effective reproductive strategy. Ovoviviparous means they're born pregnant and give birth to live young. This aphid right here is giving birth to its baby who is pregnant and within 3 days can start having its own babies. Okay? Maybe it's a little longer than 3 days. 3 days is another thing I got to tell you about. Okay, they're also parthenogenic. They don't need males. They have males at the end of the season. Males and females at the end of the season will develop wings. They'll fly away, they'll mate, fly away, go lay eggs someplace. Okay? But during the course of the season, an aphid colony can double in size every 3 days if it's 80%, or excuse me, 80 degrees and 50% humidity or above. What's Wyoming? Okay, so they're very efficient. Planting timing, you can get away from some of these things. You need to have healthy plants. A water spray, all right, is a temporary fix, but you can knock them off the plant and dislodge them, get them out of there, okay? There are a lot of predators and parasites. Pesticides are available. Horticultural oil is a pretty good one. And then there's contact and systemic products. One of the things when I'm talking about pesticides, I don't like to spray my garden with pesticides. So if I know that I have a period of time, the pre-harvest interval, before I'm going to eat that particular crop, if it's not actually fruiting or producing something I'm going to eat in the short term, I might spray it, okay? But I'm very cautious about spraying things on my plants. Whiteflies, anybody ever dealt with them before? They really love tomatoes, okay? If you get them in a greenhouse space, they're very difficult to get rid of. Scouting is very important. They're really poor flyers. They're usually found on the underside of leaves, and horticultural oil and contact or systemic products can take care of them. Anybody dealing with scale insects? Where do you normally see them? Aspen, yes. Dogwoods, lilacs, okay? So unless you're looking for them, you're really not going to see them. They have a really weird life cycle. They never fly. So this is the adult female. That is an adult female. Going into the fall, they lay eggs, they die. They lay eggs underneath this hard shell. In the springtime, this shell kind of cracks open. The eggs have all hatched, and they have these hundreds of little tiny crawlers that come out of them and disperse. Shivers, I love it. They disperse along the plant. They find a place that they want to stay. They tap into that plant, and then they start developing this hard shell again. Okay, that's why all of these are scale insects. Okay, so mechanical things like aggressive pruning is helpful. Okay, predators and parasites, application timing is critical. You can't control these things when they're hard. You got to apply it when they're crawling around. Okay. Mealybugs, we have them, don't have much of them. Leaf hoppers, I don't need to go into them. Squash bugs, I got to touch on squash bugs. You have a garden, you have squash bugs. Where do they normally feed? Underneath side of the leaf, usually. So when they're planting eggs, when they're laying eggs, it's usually up against the midrib on the underneath side of the squash plant. So if you're going through and you're looking through your plants, as you should on a regular basis, and you see these golden pinhead eggs, take your fingers and pull them out, throw them away, stomp on them, squish them. But they're pretty hard. You got to be kind of aggressive about it, okay? So the larvae and the adults feed on the same place. How many of you ever smished? Wow. How many of you have ever smashed one of these adults? Yes. They're very smelly. They have scent glands. Okay? I have been told, I have never tried this, and I'm not so sure that it's not just an internet falsity. If you collect a bunch of these and you put them in a blender that you have committed to use in your garden space, and grind them up, strain out all the bits, put them in your sprayer and spray it back on, it works as a repellent. I'll tell you, it'd repel me. If somebody does that, I would like to know. Okay, scrapers and leaf binders. I think we're going to skip these guys. We're going to get to the last little bit and talk about it in 10 minutes. So this is the handout, okay? So I've shotgunned you guys with a whole lot of information, but everything you need to know is in here. This is a different printing, so the larva on the front is different than what this image is, but it's the same information. So pages 1 through 6 are all the IPM stuff that I talked about. Okay, if you get into pages 7 through 12, every pest that I've talked about, I name them, I give a description of them, I give some telltale signs of how you might see them if you're not really seeing them directly. I've provided you with a line drawing and with the color image of each one of these. Okay, so white flies, aphids, scale insects, thrips, flies, leaf miners, yada, yada, yada. Okay, all of that stuff. All right, so let's go to table 5 on page 13. Believe it or not, you can purchase beneficial insects for your use in a garden. So let's just look at Hippodamia convergens. This is the convergent lady beetle. This is the atypical lady beetle that you think of when you mentally have a picture of a lady beetle. Okay? It's the picture that I first showed you that was out there. All right, so you can order these things. If you have aphids, you also need to be able to trap the beetles on the plants that have aphids, because lady beetles have a behavior that's called aggregation. In the fall of the year, they go to the mountains and they all hibernate together. These companies know where those locations are, and they go and harvest them, put them in little containers, then take them back to their lab and put them in coolers or a refrigerator and store them. You have an aphid problem. Hey, I'm going to order Hippodamia convergens. You call up the lab or send them an email. They send them to you. You go, hey, great, I have lady beetles. It's 80 degrees out in my greenhouse. I'm going to go let them go. You open up the container. They go, hey, it's spring. We're still in the mountains. We need to go away from here. They leave. You never see them again. What you're trying to do, you need to trap them, put floating row cover or something over the plants and trap them and get them to stay long enough so that they start laying eggs. Okay? It's things to think about when you're doing this. You can order lacewings. How do you think they come? As eggs. They're stuck flat to a card, and you have to clip them to your plants. So you might only get 1 or 2 of them off of a card because they're wandering around eating their brothers and sisters. Okay? So make sure when you put them out on the plant that you disperse these cards away from their siblings. Okay? So there's little things like that you need to know. But there's everybody loves a mantid, right? Praying mantis. They're really cool. They're native in Wyoming. We see them every once in a while. There's mites you can order. There's true bugs that you can order. These guys, minute pirate bugs. Aureus insidious. They're really, really tiny and really, really hungry. Okay? They will bite you. And they smell. They have scent glands. Okay? So, but they're really good predators. They like those worms that we talked about. They'll feed on them. If they can poke their mouth parts in them, they'll be feeding on them. Okay? So you can order predators. You can also order parasites if you want to play around with parasites. Same thing applies though. You need to trap them with the host for a while so that they find them and that they are able to lay eggs in them, and so that those larvae develop and you start to see the mummies. Okay? What I didn't point out on the previous one in the predators is over on the right-hand side of the table, all those numbers over there, table 7 on page 15 are all the list of suppliers in the United States that you can order these things from. So Hippodamia convergens, I can order from supplier 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 in this table. Same thing with parasites. Oh, I'm not too far over. All right. Oh, there's the list. So I didn't have enough room for these 5 more, but those 10 are listed in the table. Okay? There's one or 2 in Colorado. Colorado Springs, Bayfield, Colorado. Okay? So they're close. So that's important. natural products, things like horticultural oil, things like dipel, this Bacillus thuringiensis, okay? So just to give you kind of an overview of this table, azadirachtin is a derivative of the neem tree. Everybody heard of neem oil, neem tree? So it's kind of a horticultural oil, but look how it works. It's an insect growth regulator. It messes around with how they molt, okay? This IRAC stuff, this kind of gives us an idea of how they work.
Unfortunately, the batteries died in the microphone, cutting this video short. There are links to the resources discussed in this presentation in the description below. Thank you for watching a University of Wyoming Extension presentation, and thank you to our sponsors and partners. Check out our other Harvest Wyoming 2024 videos.